At exactly 2:17 in the morning, the security system at the prestigious Sterling Crown Bank sent out an alert. Not a fire alarm, not a forced entry warning, not even a camera failure. The message was only 3 words: vault balance mismatch. Inside the bank's underground vault was supposed to be $38 million in certified bonds and emergency reserve certificates. But according to the system, $6.4 million was missing. The vault door was still locked. The walls were untouched. The cameras were working. The motion sensors had recorded nothing unusual. And the security guards had never seen anyone enter the vault. When police arrived, they discovered something impossible. The thief had stolen millions without ever touching the vault. But the strangest part of the entire case was this. The stolen money had not disappeared during the night. It had disappeared 3 months earlier, and someone inside the bank had been quietly watching it happen. Chapter 1. The bank that could not be robbed. Sterling Crown Bank was considered one of the most secure financial institutions in the country. Its headquarters stood in the center of the city like a fortress of glass and steel. The bank handled private wealth, government certificates, international bonds, and confidential assets belonging to some of the most powerful people in the country. But the most protected place inside the building was the underground vault. The vault was located 4 floors beneath the street. Its door weighed more than 10 tons. It required 2 separate security codes, 2 physical keys, a biometric scan, and the approval of 2 senior bank officers. Even if someone managed to enter the vault, they would still need to know which containers held the most valuable assets. For years, security consultants had called it nearly impossible to rob. But on a cold Monday morning, the bank's chief financial auditor, Daniel Reed, received a phone call that made his hands go cold. "Mr. Reed," said the voice on the other end, "we have a serious problem." Daniel looked up from his desk. "What kind of problem?" There was a pause. Then the voice answered, "The vault inventory is wrong." Daniel immediately stood. "Wrong by how much?" Another pause. $6.4 million. Daniel stopped breathing for a moment. The bank's security team checked the vault. Everything looked normal. Every door was locked. Every seal was intact. Every camera had recorded exactly what it was supposed to record. The vault had not been opened. Not once. So how could millions be missing? Daniel walked down to the underground level with the bank's security director, Marcus Hale. Marcus was a former military security specialist who trusted almost no one. He stared at the vault door. "Maybe the inventory system is wrong," he said. Daniel shook his head. "The system is connected to 3 separate databases. Then the databases are wrong. They were checked this morning." Marcus stared at him. "Then someone stole the money." Daniel looked toward the enormous steel door. Without opening the vault, neither man spoke, because both knew what that meant. If the vault had not been touched, then the theft had happened somewhere else. Chapter 2. The first impossible clue. The investigation began with the simplest question. What exactly was missing? The answer was not cash. There were no piles of money inside the vault. The missing assets were certified bonds and reserve certificates. Each certificate represented a specific amount of money. Some were worth $50,000. Some were worth $100,000. And some were worth several million dollars. The certificates were stored in sealed containers inside the vault. But the bank's records showed something strange. According to the computer system, the certificates had been in the vault. According to the vault inventory, they were still in the vault. But according to the financial clearing system, some of them had already been redeemed. The first officer investigating the case assumed the computer systems had been hacked. But there was a problem. The transactions had not been made from outside the bank. They had been approved using official internal credentials. The approvals had occurred during normal business hours. They had passed through the bank's own security network. And every transaction had been signed by someone with proper authorization. The police quickly narrowed their attention to 6 senior employees. One of them had to be involved. But the investigation soon revealed something even more confusing. None of the 6 people had personally transferred the money. Their credentials had been used, but their computers showed no evidence of suspicious activity. No strange software. No unauthorized access. No unusual login locations. It looked as if the transactions had been approved. without anyone approving them. That was when Daniel Reed discovered the first clue. He noticed that all the missing certificates had one thing in common. They had not been redeemed on the same day. They had been redeemed gradually. One transaction here, another several days later, another 2 weeks after that. The theft had not been a sudden attack. It had been carefully planned. Someone had been taking small pieces of the fortune, while making the bank believe nothing had changed. Chapter 3. The man everyone ignored. The investigation continued for 2 weeks. Employees were questioned. Computers were examined. Security footage was reviewed. But nothing made sense. Then a detective noticed a name appearing repeatedly in the bank's internal maintenance records. Elias Grant. Elias was 58 years old. He had worked at Sterling Crown Bank for almost 24 years. He was not a manager. He was not an accountant. He had no access to the vault. He had no authority to approve financial transactions. His official job was maintaining the bank's physical records and archiving old documents. Most employees barely noticed him. Every morning, Elias arrived at 6:30. He carried a small black notebook. He drank coffee alone. And every evening, he left at exactly 5:15. The detectives initially dismissed him. What could a records clerk possibly have to do with a $6 million theft? One officer asked. But Daniel Reed remembered something. Elias had worked in the bank longer than almost everyone. He knew the building. He knew the filing systems. He knew which departments handled which documents. He knew which employees changed positions. And he knew something else. 3 months before the theft was discovered, the bank had changed its digital certification system. Several old paper records had been transferred into a new electronic database. Elias had been part of the archiving team. He had helped organize the documents. He had scanned thousands of pages. He had access to information that almost no one else had ever seen. But access to information was not the same as access to millions of dollars. The police searched Elias's apartment. They found no stolen money, no expensive cars, no luxury watches, no secret accounts, nothing. The only unusual item they found was his small black notebook. Inside were hundreds of numbers, dates, times, employee names, and strange symbols. The detectives assumed it was evidence. But when they showed the notebook to Daniel Reed, he immediately recognized something. "These aren't random numbers," Daniel said. "What are they?" Daniel stared at the pages. "They look like inventory references." The room became silent. The numbers in Elias's notebook appeared to correspond to the exact certificates that had been redeemed. But why would a records clerk be tracking them? And why had he written the information down months before the theft was discovered? Chapter 4. The First Twist. The detectives brought Elias in for questioning. He sat quietly across from them. His clothes were simple. His expression was calm. The lead detective placed the notebook on the table. "Do you know what these numbers are?" Elias looked at the notebook. "Yes." "What are they?" "Records." "Records of what?" "Certificates." The detective leaned forward. "You knew about the missing certificates?" Elias looked at him. "I knew they were missing." The detective froze. "When did you know?" Elias answered. 3 months ago." The room went silent. "Why didn't you report it?" Elias looked down at his hands. "Because no one would have believed me." The detective pushed the notebook toward him. "You wrote down the exact certificate numbers." "Yes." "Why?" "Because I was trying to understand what was happening." The detective studied him. "What was happening?" Elias took a deep breath. "The bank was losing money. That's what we already know." "No," Elias said quietly. "You don't know how." The detective leaned forward. "Then tell us." Elias looked at the wall. "The thief never went into the vault." The detective said nothing. Elias continued. "The thief never needed to." Chapter 5. The Real Weakness. Elias explained that the vault contained physical certificates. But those certificates were not the only thing that gave them value. Their real value existed inside the bank's financial system. When a certificate was redeemed, the physical document was supposed to be removed from the vault. But there was a problem. The bank had recently changed its digital system. The new system allowed certificates to be processed electronically before the physical documents were physically removed. It had been designed to speed up transactions. Normally, the process was simple. A customer requested redemption. An authorized employee approved it. The system marked the certificate as redeemed. The physical certificate was removed from a vault. The transaction was completed. But during the transition to the new system, a dangerous gap had been created. The digital system could mark a certificate as redeemed, while the physical certificate remained inside the vault. For a short period of time, the bank was effectively holding two versions of the same asset. One physical, one digital. The system believed the certificate was gone, but the physical certificate was still there. The bank believed it had completed a normal transaction, but the certificate had never actually been removed. That created a strange opportunity. Someone could redeem a certificate digitally and leave the physical certificate untouched. Then the same physical certificate could later be used again. The vault would still appear full. The digital system would show the asset as properly processed, and the bank's employees would never realize that the same asset had been used more than once. But there was still one question. How could a thief profit from this? The answer was far more complicated than anyone expected. Chapter 6. The Invisible Theft. The thief did not steal the certificates. The thief created transactions. Small ones. Careful ones. The thief would select a certificate worth $500,000. The system would show it as redeemed. The money would be transferred through the normal financial process, but the physical certificate would remain in the vault. Then, weeks later, the same certificate could be used again under a different transaction. The digital system would not always recognize the duplication, because the system had been designed to track the certificate status, not the complete history of every time it had been used during the transition period. The thief had discovered a weakness in the system, but discovering the weakness was not enough. They needed authorization. They needed internal access, and they needed to know exactly which certificates were available. That was where Elias became important, because Elias had discovered the problem first. He had been scanning the old records. While comparing paper records with the new electronic system, he noticed something strange. Some certificates appeared in the physical archive, but the digital system marked them as already redeemed. At first, Elias thought it was an error. Then he found another, and another. He started recording the numbers in his notebook. Eventually, he realized that the errors were not random. Someone was intentionally exploiting the gap. But Elias had made one mistake. He assumed the thief was an employee. He was wrong. The person behind the operation was not working alone, and the person controlling the transactions was much closer to the bank's leadership than anyone imagined. Chapter 7. The Man Who Could Authorize Everything. The police examined every transaction connected to the missing certificates. They noticed a pattern. The approvals appeared to come from different employees, but the transactions were all processed through the same internal administrative system. The system was used by senior managers. It was supposed to be protected by individual passwords, but during the transition to the new system, there was one special account, a temporary administrative account. It had been created for technical support. The account was supposed to be deleted after the transition, but had never been removed. Its access could approve certain actions. Its activity appeared legitimate. And most importantly, the account was not linked to one specific employee. The police began looking at everyone who knew about the account. Only 3 people had full knowledge of it: the bank's chief technology officer, a systems contractor, and the bank's former operations director. His name was Victor Lang. Victor had left the bank 6 months before the theft was discovered. He had resigned unexpectedly. He had told colleagues he wanted to start a consulting business. But investigators discovered something interesting. Victor had not simply left. He had continued receiving payments from a private consulting company, a company registered under a name that appeared to have no connection to him. But one of the company's directors was his brother. The police searched the company's financial records. There were payments, large payments, but the money did not come from Sterling Crown Bank. It came from another financial institution, and that institution had purchased several of the certificates connected to the theft. The evidence suddenly seemed overwhelming. Victor had discovered the weakness. He had created the temporary account. He had built the system, and after leaving the bank, he had continued exploiting it. But there was still a problem. Victor had an alibi for every major transaction, and the system showed that he had not logged into the bank's network. Not once. The police were back where they started. Chapter 8. The Second Twist. Daniel Reed returned to the bank's transaction records. He noticed something that everyone else had missed. The fraudulent transactions were not made at random times. They were made exactly 11 minutes after legitimate transactions. Every time, 11 minutes. Daniel checked the dates. The pattern continued. A legitimate transaction would be processed. Exactly 11 minutes later, another transaction would occur. Sometimes the second transaction involved a certificate that appeared completely unrelated. But it wasn't. Daniel studied the records more closely. Then he understood. The thief had not been choosing certificates randomly. The legitimate transactions were being used as cover. The thief had created a system that copied the timing pattern of real activity. The stolen transactions were hidden among ordinary financial operations. But why 11 minutes? Because the bank's automated system performed an internal verification cycle every 10 minutes. The thief had discovered that transactions submitted during the short period after the verification cycle were temporarily treated as pending. During that window, the system did not immediately compare every certificate against the physical inventory. The thief was using the system's own delay against it. But the question remained, who had the technical knowledge to design such a system? The answer was obvious. Victor Lung. But the police still could not prove he had personally executed the transactions. Then Elias said something that changed the entire case. Victor didn't do it. The detective stared at him. What do you mean? Elias pointed to the notebook. Victor created the weakness. Then who used it? Elias turned to the final page. There was only one name written there. Marchi Valley. Chapter 9. The Quiet Accountant. Martin Vale was the bank's senior reconciliation accountant. He had worked there for 17 years. He was considered dependable, quiet, professional, the kind of person nobody suspected. He had no criminal record, no suspicious lifestyle, no obvious financial problems. But he had one unusual connection. Martin had worked directly under Victor Lang for almost 10 years. He had helped test the new digital system. He had access to the internal reconciliation reports. And he was one of the few people who knew that the temporary administrative account still existed. But Martin denied everything. I never stole anything, he said. The police showed him the transaction pattern. Martin looked at the records. Then he said, "You're looking at the wrong person." The detective placed Elias's notebook on the table. "Why did Elias write your name?" Martin looked at the notebook. For the first time, his expression changed. The detective noticed. "You know what this is?" Martin said nothing. Then he slowly leaned back. "Elias was trying to warn you." "Warn us about what?" Martin stared at the table. "The money was never stolen." The detective frowned. "What?" Martin continued. "The money was moved." "Where?" Martin looked up. Into a system nobody was watching. Chapter 10. The Secret Account. Martin finally explained the real operation. Victor Lang had discovered the technical weakness during the system transition. But Victor did not steal the money. He created the vulnerability. Then he left. Martin was the person who understood how to use it. For months, Martin created transactions that appeared legitimate. The funds were not sent directly to him. They were routed through a series of legitimate-looking financial institutions. Each transfer was small enough to avoid immediate suspicion. The money was then combined into larger accounts. By the time the bank noticed the missing assets, the money had passed through multiple layers of transactions. But Martin had not kept the money for himself. He had been working with someone else, someone who had access to the final accounts. The police traced the money. The trail eventually led to a private investment firm. The firm was owned by Martin Vale's wife. The business had been created 2 years earlier. At first, the company appeared to be completely legitimate. It had real employees, real offices, real investments. But investigators discovered that its largest source of capital came from a series of unexplained transfers. Transfers connected to the missing certificates. Martin had not stolen millions from the vault. He had turned the bank's own records into a machine for creating invisible transactions. And the most shocking part was this. The physical certificates were still inside the vault. The bank had been robbed, while its vault remained completely full. Chapter 11. The Confession. Martin eventually confessed, but his explanation surprised investigators. He claimed he never intended to steal $6.4 million. At first, he had only taken $50,000. He wanted to test the system. When no one noticed, he took another $100,000. Then $250,000. The system continued working. Every time he believed the bank would discover the problem. But nobody did. So he continued. The more money he moved, the more confident he became. Eventually, the theft reached millions. Martin believed the bank was too large to notice, too complicated, too dependent on its own systems. He believed that no one would ever compare the physical assets with the digital history. But he had not counted on Elias Grant. Elias was not a powerful executive. He was not a technology expert. He was not a millionaire. He was simply a man who paid attention. While everyone else trusted the computer system, Elias trusted the paper. And the paper told a different story. Chapter 12. The Final Secret. The case seemed solved. Martin was arrested. Victor Lang was located and charged with helping create the system vulnerability. The stolen funds were traced. The bank began repairing its security systems. But Daniel Reed could not stop thinking about one question. Why had Elias waited 3 months before reporting the problem? The answer came from Elias himself. He had tried to report it several times, but nobody listened. He had sent messages to supervisors. He had written reports. He had asked for an internal audit. Each time, he was told the same thing. It's probably a system error. So Elias began investigating on his own. He created his notebook. He tracked the certificate numbers. He followed the transaction dates. He studied the patterns. And eventually, he discovered the entire theft. But he still did not know who the thief was. That was why he had remained silent. He was afraid that if he accused the wrong person, the real thief would destroy the evidence. So Elias waited. He watched, and he wrote everything down. Then, one night, he noticed something. One of the certificates that had been marked as redeemed had suddenly changed status. The digital system showed it as active again. That should have been impossible. Elias realized the thief had made a mistake. They had accidentally restored a certificate while trying to hide the transaction history. That one error revealed the entire system, and it eventually led investigators to Martin. The ending, the vault that was never robbed. Months later, Sterling Crown Bank reopened its underground vault for a complete audit. The vault door was opened. The containers were removed. Every certificate was counted. And there it was, the physical evidence of the strangest financial theft in the bank's history. Almost everything was still there. The vault had never been broken into. No locks had been forced. No alarms had been triggered. No guards had been bribed. No walls had been drilled through. The thief had never needed to enter. Because the real vault was not made of steel. The real vault was the bank system. And the thief had discovered that the strongest security in the world could still fail if the people using it stopped asking questions. Daniel Reed later said the most important lesson from the case was not about technology. It was about trust. The bank trusted its computers. The employees trusted the reports. The managers trusted the system. And because everyone trusted something else to check the numbers, nobody checked them carefully. Except one man, Elias Grant, the quiet records clerk who had no authority, no title, no access to the vault, and no power inside the bank. But he had something far more important. He noticed that the numbers did not make sense. And sometimes, the smallest clue is enough to expose the biggest crime. Because in the end, the thief did not steal millions from a vault. He stole them from the space between what the bank believed and what was actually true. And the vault? The vault remained untouched, locked, full, and completely innocent. Final, tiene outro. But here's the question. If a bank's vault was full, its security cameras worked, and every door remained locked, how long would it take before anyone realized millions had disappeared? Tell us your theory in the comments. And if you enjoy impossible heists, hidden clues, and mysteries where nothing is ever what it seems, subscribe to the Heist Files, because the next crime may be the one nobody even knows has happened yet.